Welcome to the Library of Alexandra, a place for curious minds and complicated books, made a little easier to understand. Because the truth is, we all imagine ourselves reading more, learning more, becoming more. But life doesn't always give us the time. So here, we take those dense, intimidating books and turn them into something you can actually absorb and reflect on. If you'd like to keep exploring with me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Then tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Think of it as signing the library guest book. And if you know someone who keeps buying books they never finish, send them this video. The library is calling.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are stepping into some intensely provocative territory today.
We really are. It's a massive topic.
Yeah, and I want you, the listener, to start by just asking yourself a question and really consider the implications here. What if your own body possessed a built-in mechanism that could instantly tell you the absolute truth or the absolute falsehood of literally any statement, object, or event in the universe?
Just right there. It's a huge claim.
Right. We aren't talking about, intuition that you cultivate over decades or polygraph machines measuring your heart rate. We are talking about a simple, undeniable, binary muscle reflex, like a physical lie detector connected not just to your nervous system, but to the fundamental fabric of reality itself.
It is a premise that, frankly, borders on the fantastical.
Yeah.
Yet it forms the absolute bedrock of the material we are examining today.
Yeah.
We are exploring the core concepts laid out in David R. Hawkins' seminal, and I should say highly debated, text, Power versus Force. It's subtitled The Hidden Determinants of Human Behavior. And Hawkins, bringing his background as an MD and a Ph.D., attempts something incredibly ambitious here.
Yeah, he really swings for the fences.
He does. He constructs a unified architecture of human consciousness by synthesizing clinical kinesiology, theoretical physics, nonlinear dynamics, and mystical philosophy.
All in one book.
All in one book.
Yeah.
And our mission for this deep dive is to basically treat this framework as an intellectual sandbox. We're going to dissect his proposed anatomy of consciousness, decode the fundamental difference between power and force, and see how these hidden energy fields theoretically dictate human history, society, and our own individual lives.
And knowing you, our listener, you don't just want a surface-level skim. You're here because you love connecting the dots across completely different fields. So whether you walk away from this deep dive fundamentally agreeing with Hawkins or just completely dismantling his conclusions, treating this as a diagnostic lens is going to give you some massive aha moments. We are going to completely reframe how you view human behavior, conflict, and personal growth.
But it does require a temporary suspension of our conventional mechanistic understanding of the world. The text argues that society is basically caught in this loop, constantly expending its energy trying to surgically alter the effects of problems rather than addressing the unseen causes.
The root issues.
Right. So by adopting Hawkins' framework for the next hour or so, we can test drive a completely different diagnostic tool for the human condition, one that privileges invisible energy fields over observable material actions.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the entire architecture of the book rests on this one foundational premise. Hawkins proposes that human behavior is not just the result of random psychological variables or, purely rational decision-making.
No, it's far deeper than that, according to the text.
Right. He argues our behavior is controlled by hidden energy fields. And the wild part, the really provocative claim, is that we can measure our alignment with these fields using a physical technique called clinical kinesiology. Specifically, muscle testing.
Yes. And before we get into the muscle testing, the title itself, Power versus Force, establishes the fundamental dichotomy of his whole worldview. He gives these two words highly specific, almost physics-based definitions.
Yeah, they aren't just synonyms here.
Not at all. Force is characterized strictly as movement against something. It is inherently antagonistic. And because it moves against resistance, it requires a constant, unending input of energy to maintain its momentum.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. It inherently creates conflict. It necessitates a win-lose dynamic. Force relies on expediency, coercion, and a very localized, narrow viewpoint. If you think about it mechanically, force is like a heavy machine that constantly needs coal or fuel just to counteract its own internal friction.
Whereas power, in this framework, operates on an entirely different plane. Power doesn't move against anything. The text uses the analogy of a standing field, like gravity.
That's a great analogy.
Gravity doesn't need to push, it doesn't fight, it doesn't need to be fed coal to exist, it simply is. Power gives life, it unifies distinct entities into win-win paradigms, and it's based on absolute truth and unchanging principles rather than just, circumstantial expediency.
Which creates a really fascinating map of human consciousness. As people or entire societies evolve, they transition from relying on the exhausting mechanics of force to operating within the effortless, organizing principles of power. And that transition transforms the human experience from one of suffering to one of joy.
I want you listening to think about this in your own life for a second. Can you identify a specific time when you achieved a goal using force versus a time you achieved something through power?
We've all had both.
Oh, absolutely. Think of those projects where you had to just aggressively push through resistance, constantly fighting, compared to times when things just aligned effortlessly. The physical and emotional toll between those two is staggering. Force leaves you completely depleted, but power actually energizes you as you act.
And that internal exhaustion you feel with force is exactly what the text argues is playing out on a macro scale in our society. But to understand how Hawkins actually measures this difference, we have to look at the kinesiology experiments. This is the empirical claim anchoring his entire philosophical map.
The muscle testing.
Right. The clinical observations began with Dr. George Goodhart and were later refined by Dr. John Diamond. The physical test itself is remarkably simple. It involves a subject and a tester. The subject extends one arm parallel to the floor.
Like straight out to the side.
Exactly. The tester places 2 fingers on the subject's wrist and presses down quickly and firmly, just telling the subject to resist the downward pressure.
But the goal isn't to test gym strength, right?
No, not at all. You aren't trying to wrestle them to the ground. You are just testing the deltoid muscle's ability to lock the shoulder joint against a sudden push. The foundational insight here was that this indicator muscle would inexplicably lose its ability to lock in the presence of negative stimuli. It would just go weak.
And it stays strong in the presence of positive stimuli.
Yes. Initially, they focused on physical substances. The classic example in the book is artificial sweeteners. If a subject puts a packet of synthetic sweetener on their tongue, or even just holds it against their solar plexus, the deltoid muscle fails to lock. The arm goes weak.
But if you swap that for a natural organic supplement, the muscle tests strong.
Correct. But then Dr. Diamond took these localized physical responses and expanded them. He started testing emotional and auditory stimuli.
This is where it gets wild. The results he recorded were jarring. If the tester simply smiled at the subject, the arm stayed strong. If the tester said, "I hate you," the arm went weak.
It responded to the emotional frequency.
Right. And then music. Classical compositions, traditional rock and roll, they generated universally strong responses. But certain heavy metal tracks from the late 70s, music with specific discordant frequencies and aggressive lyrics, produced universally weak responses. It instantly drained the muscle's ability to lock.
Now, a skeptic could easily say, well, a localized biochemical reaction explains the artificial sweetener, or basic psychological conditioning explains reacting to a smile versus an insult. But Hawkins introduces what he accurately calls a paradigm shock.
The blind testing.
The blind testing. The text details experiments where subjects tested weak or strong without any conscious awareness of the substance being tested. In double-blind studies, subjects were handed completely unmarked envelopes. One had a synthetic sweetener, the other an inert placebo.
And they didn't know which was which.
Nobody knew. Yet the subjects consistently tested weak when holding the hidden sweetener and strong when holding the placebo.
The double-blind studies are where the friction really starts for me. It's one thing for a muscle to react to a chemical on your tongue, but an unmarked envelope implies the body is bypassing local biology entirely. The physical organism somehow knew the contents of a sealed envelope, independent of the conscious mind.
And Hawkins took this anomaly and pushed it to its absolute limits. He began testing intellectual truths and historical falsehoods. The text notes that when subjects listened to recordings of known historical deceits like the Tonkin Gulf hoax, their indicator muscles universally tested weak, but listening to demonstrably true statements made them test strong.
Which is a massive leap. We have to acknowledge what he's doing here. He took this binary yes or no muscle response and used it to calibrate an exhaustive map of human consciousness. He established a logarithmic scale from 1 to 1,000.
And we should clarify the mathematics of a base 10 logarithmic scale. Going from level 200 to level 300 is not just adding 100 points.
No, it's exponential.
Exactly. It's 10 to the 300th power compared to 10 to the 200th power. Each step up the scale represents an unfathomable increase in power. And on this map, the calibration level of 200 is the critical fulcrum of human existence.
It's the dividing line. Everything below 200 is characterized by force. Everything above it is power.
Right. So below 200, you have things like apathy at 50, which is hopelessness. Desire at 125, which is addiction and craving. Anger is 150. Pride is 175. All of these levels are vulnerable because they require external energy to maintain. They constantly generate counterforce.
But at 200, which he labels courage, a monumental shift happens. Courage is the entry point to power. It's the first level where you begin putting more energy back into the world than you extract from it. And above 200, the attractor fields get incredibly dominant. Willingness is 310, reason is 400, love is 500, peace is 600.
But this inevitably begs a deeper question. How does a deltoid muscle interface with abstract concepts like reason or love or historical events?
Yeah, how does the arm know?
Hawkins answers this with the concept of the database of consciousness. He compares the human mind to a computer terminal. We are not isolated hard drives. We are networked. We are connected to a giant universal database of consciousness.
I love this analogy. It essentially implies that everything is knowable about anything or anyone, anywhere, at any point in time. We are all plugged into the same mainframe.
And this infinite repository of data is supposedly accessible within seconds through that binary muscle test.
Which brings up a great question for you listening. If you could use a simple muscle test to get a guaranteed yes or no to any question in the universe, what is the first thing you would ask and why?
It's a tempting thought. You'd want to use it for the stock market or lottery numbers.
Oh, totally. But the text suggests the test itself only works when the intention behind the question calibrates above 200, meaning it has to be rooted in integrity. You can't use it for selfish, force-based motives.
That's a fascinating self-regulating mechanism within his theory. But to truly grasp this database, we have to look at how Hawkins redefines causality. He breaks down the philosophical shift from linear to nonlinear thinking.
We are so used to linear thinking. A causes B causes C.
Exactly. The way we usually think is what the text calls the domain of effects. It's just the observable material world.
The dominoes falling.
Right. But Hawkins argues that linear thinking is an illusion. The true domain of causes is nonlinear. It operates on what chaos theory calls attractor patterns, so things don't cause other things in the physical world. Instead, invisible attractor fields pattern reality simultaneously. It's an ABC attractor pattern, setting everything up at once.
The best way to visualize this is the movie projector analogy. Imagine life as a movie theater. We spend all our time standing at the screen, trying to change the images on the canvas.
Applying force.
Yes, applying force. We pass new laws, we go to war, we argue. We are just trying to manipulate the effects on the screen. But true power lies in walking back to the projection booth and changing the film inside the projector. The film is the consciousness, the attractor field. You change that, and the images on the screen change automatically without any force.
That conceptual shift is perfectly encapsulated in some of the quotes from the text. Let's look at a few of these because they really anchor the philosophy. The first one is, force always moves against something, whereas power does not move against anything.
It's so simple, but it explains the vulnerability of force. Force is incomplete. It needs to be constantly fed, like that machine needing coal. And because it moves against something, it creates polarization. It needs endless justification and propaganda. Power is total and complete in itself, like gravity.
The second quote takes this abstract physics idea and makes it deeply personal. He writes, "The universe holds its breath as we choose, instant by instant, which pathway to follow. For the universe, the very essence of life itself is highly conscious."
Here's where it gets really interesting for our daily lives. This removes the comfort of living in a dead mechanical universe where your private thoughts don't matter. It places a profound weight on our daily choices. Every thought adds to a permanent mosaic in this database.
It elevates mundane ethical choices to actions of cosmic significance. If the universe is highly conscious, then every thought that supports life elevates the collective, and every thought rooted in force diminishes it.
Which leads right into the third quote, and this is almost a paradox. He writes, "Simple kindness to oneself and all that lives is the most powerful transformational force of all."
I love the juxtaposition there. In a book discussing advanced physics, nonlinear dynamics, and massive global shifts, the ultimate tool for accessing enormous power is just basic, everyday kindness.
It's the most accessible entry point. Kindness is a high-energy attractor field that has no negative backlash. You don't have to defend kindness.
Exactly. But the fourth quote addresses the inevitable skepticism readers will have. He says, "To the non-believers, everything is false until proven true. To the believers, everything said in good faith is probably true unless it is proven false."
He is really categorizing human perception there into two distinct lenses. He associates hyperskepticism and cynicism with fear, which is a lower energy force state. And he associates optimism and acceptance with self-confidence, a higher energy power state.
It's a highly strategic rhetorical framing. He's preemptively diagnosing the skeptics. But to bridge that gap, he heavily connects his ideas to established science. He connects the text to chaos theory and nonlinear dynamics. He mentions strange attractors.
Right, because chaos is really just a mass of data waiting for an organizing pattern to be recognized.
Yes, when early computers analyzed seemingly random data, like weather patterns, they found hidden, highly coherent geometric patterns underlying the chaos. Hawkins argues human behavior is governed by similar massive hidden attractor fields.
He also connects it to psychology, specifically Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, or spiritus mundi. The idea that disparate cultures developed identical myths independently implies a shared database of human experience.
And he scales this up to historical ideas, framing history as the slow evolution from force to power. He provides a fascinating analysis of the British Empire versus Mahatma Gandhi.
This blew my mind. According to his calibrations, the British Empire at that time calibrated at 175, which is pride, its exploitation, its force, but Gandhi calibrated at 700. Near the very top of the human scale.
And because the scale is logarithmic, a single individual at 700 wields an attractor field of power that is exponentially greater than a global empire at 175. The geopolitical outcome wasn't decided by military strategy, but by the physics of consciousness. Force inevitably falls to power.
He uses Abraham Lincoln as another example. Lincoln's compassion during the Civil War, recognizing it as a tragic struggle rather than operating from personal hatred, aligned him with power.
This diagnostic tool is also applied to modern society. And we should remind the listener here, these are historical and structural examples from the text. We are impartially exploring the author's framework without taking political sides.
Absolutely.
He draws a distinction between the statesman and the politician. The statesman operates from power. They rely on principles, the heart, and uniting people. The politician operates from force. They rely on expediency, the intellect, and ruling by persuasion and division.
And he looks at the justice system, too. The text argues that punishment, revenge, violence, it all calibrates weakly at 150. It's ineffective. True solutions involve supporting causes, raising the baseline energy, rather than just attacking effects with more prisons.
Even sports aren't immune. The Olympics represent true human greatness and power. But media exploitation, nationalism, and the lust for fame drag the athletes down into ego and pride, which is force.
Okay, it is time to put on our critical thinking hats. Because the claims here are massive. We have to look at the actual mechanism of kinesiology.
Right. We have to question the leap from a localized physical reflex, like a muscle weakening due to a chemical, to a universal truth-telling device. How can a deltoid muscle know if a historical event is objectively true? The physical mechanism bridging the arm to the non-local database is highly speculative.
And the text itself points out a huge vulnerability. The danger of righteousness. Everyone feels justified in their viewpoints. A political extremist at level 150 feels perfectly logically justified. A killer can rationalize their behavior.
Everyone is the hero of their own narrative, which introduces an epistemological dilemma. If subjective bias is that profound, can a human organism truly act as an objective measuring device? Even with double-blind verification, could the unconscious biases of the tester and subject theoretically interfere?
If everything is only true within a specific, unseen context, does absolute truth exist in a way humans can actually interpret without flaw? It's a huge paradox.
It is. But ultimately, Hawkins asks the reader to look at the big ideas, the overarching worldview. The central message is that the human race is on an evolutionary ladder of consciousness. Currently, mankind is barely on the first rung, stuck relying on force to solve problems.
Which brings us to personal responsibility. There's a phrase in the book, nothing out there has power over you. Stress isn't caused by external events, it's caused by how we react to them.
Exactly. A financial loss or a divorce could be a devastating tragedy, or a liberating release. It's not the event, it's your chosen attractor field generating the experience. This shifts you from a victim of circumstances to an active participant in your reality.
And this scales up to the survival of the species. The ultimate conclusion is that society's problems, war, crime, hunger, they cannot be solved by applying more force. More laws, more taxation, more warfare won't work. They can only be resolved by elevating the overall energy field of consciousness through peace and truth.
This brings us to some really important discussion questions for the listener or for your next book club.
Yes. We already asked the first one about what you would muscle test, but here is question number 2. Think of a time you achieved a goal using force versus a time you achieved something through power. How did the physical and emotional toll differ?
Question 3. The author states that meaning is so important that when life loses meaning, suicide commonly ensues. How do you define meaning in your own life, and is it rooted in power or force?
Number 4. Do you agree that human behavior operates more on pattern recognition than logical reasoning? How does this show up in your daily decision-making?
And finally, number 5. If all of our individual thoughts influence the collective database of consciousness, how does that change your responsibility toward your own private inner dialogue?
That last one is heavy, which leads to our practical reflection. What does this all actually mean for you tomorrow morning?
The text has a great analogy here comparing Tiny Tim and Scrooge from A Christmas Carol. We are all both victims and tyrants in different areas of our lives. We have multiple levels of consciousness coexisting within us.
So we shouldn't just label ourselves wholly good or bad. We have to audit our motives. The practical advice is that like goes to like. Being kind to a stranger is literally building up a bank account in a subtle energy field.
It brings power into our lives organically, without us directly forcing an outcome. We need to reevaluate our motives. Are your goals fueled by pride and competition, which leads to vulnerability and counterforce? Or are they fueled by excellence, compassion, and a desire to uplift others?
I want to pivot here because I'm so excited to dive into the truly mind-bending, weird, mystical points of this text. Hawkins goes way beyond psychology.
He really does. In the later chapters, he tackles the absolute and the end of time. He asserts that in the ultimate reality, the unmanifest, there is no sequence, there is no backwards or forwards, and no time as we know it.
That quote, "The Big Bang can only occur in the mind of an observer," that just shattered my brain. He's saying creation is continuous and simultaneous.
It completely dismantles the illusion of causality. And this ties back to Jung's concept of synchronicity. An event here doesn't cause an event there. They both just appear simultaneously because they are drawn from the same underlying pattern. They are expressions of the same invisible geometry.
And he pushes beyond consciousness itself. He discusses the mystic's view that the observable world is basically a dream. True awareness goes beyond consciousness to a state of non-duality.
A state that literally cannot be described with concepts or words, because language requires duality, a subject and an object. It's the ultimate philosophical endpoint of his map.
It implies our whole chaotic, force-driven reality is just a filtered translation of an infinite power. Wow, we have traversed an incredible landscape today.
We really went from the biology of a deltoid muscle all the way to the unmanifest cosmos.
We did. From muscle testing to the database of consciousness, the stark contrast between the exhaustion of force and the effortless grace of power, and the mystical nature of reality.
And we applied some rigorous critical scrutiny along the way.
Definitely. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own. The text says that falsehood no longer needs to hold sway over our lives because we can test for the absolute truth. But think about this. If the truth of every politician's intent, every corporate promise, and every personal relationship were instantly verifiable to everyone, would our current society survive the shock, or would it immediately collapse to make way for something new? Think about it.
It's a wild hypothetical.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We love tearing into these paradigm-shifting concepts and exploring these hidden determinants of human behavior with you. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.